The Screaming Ravens and I have returned from our first ever outing at a Warhammer 40k tournament. I participated in a single-day 3-game tournament hosted at the Tabletop Tactics Lodge as part of their ongoing 40k league, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity to attempt some real competitive 40k in a potentially more relaxed environment. And so, after needlessly procrastinating on painting the remaining models in my army, then spending a full weekend of non-stop painting to try and catch up, I was finally ready to tackle my first foray into the competitive scene and see what the tournament is really about. I'll be creating 2 videos about this tournament. This first video will be about my thoughts and experiences of playing in a tournament environment and how the day went overall. And then the next video will be about the actual games themselves and how well I managed to do with 12 Centurions, a Stormraven, and a Dream. So if you want to see that video, let me know in the comments and make sure to subscribe. I had an absolute blast playing at the Tabletop Tactics Lodge, and my first tournament experience was definitely a positive one. I'd absolutely be up to returning to the TT Lodge for another event at some point in the future. It was so much fun. And now that I've actually experienced playing games at a tournament level pace, I'd also be interested in going to another tournament, maybe even a 2-day event. I might not be able to manage it, but I'd certainly be up for giving it a go. I can only really think of 2 negative things from the entire day. One very minor and one more major, I suppose, which I'll get into later. Everyone there, both the players and the staff, were super friendly, met some awesome people, and Spider was even kind enough to give us a brief tour of the actual TT studio where they do their filming, which was really cool, but full of so much filming equipment, I can confidently say that I do not have the time, money, or space to create full battle reports with any meaningful quality. And a special shout out to Raziel for being a fan of this channel, who brought a wonderfully painted Lamenter's army, which proceeded to be on the wrong end of a Tyranid swarm 3 times in a row. I think something to consider here is that the games played as part of the league are not part of any other global 40k tournament ecosystem, and don't feed into the overall rankings for the quote-unquote proper professional circuit. Also, this is run by a popular YouTube channel with their own on-demand subscribers, so the people signing up for these events are probably also there to meet the folks they're a fan of. Both of these things mean that there was less likely to be any truly hyper-competitive players, and probably contributed to the overall atmosphere being more positive and spirited. But I don't think that everyone there was either casual or there weren't any incredibly good players at the event. I mean, the winner only dropped 4 victory points total across his 3 games, so there were definitely good players there for sure. Just know that, guys. At least not any I saw or heard of anyway. All 3 of my opponents were super friendly and really helpful during the game, and that energy really helped when playing the games and remaining positive, which I did even in defeat. I know sometimes when I play and things are going badly, I do have a tendency to get a bit salty with friends, especially if I'm not in the best moods to begin with, and I was worried that that might potentially translate to the tournament. But the positive vibes and not wanting to look like an arsehole to strangers meant that I could be genuinely positive when playing all 3 of my games. It was a very long day, which started for me at 6 AM because I had to get up early to go to Steve's, and then he drove us both over to the TT studios. We arrived in decent time and met a few of the other players in the car park, eagerly awaiting to be let loose onto the tables. Just before 9, the doors opened. We were unleashed in a very polite and organized manner and filed in, got to our tables, ready for the first game. Each game was only given 2.5 hours each, with a break for lunch after game 1 and a smaller break after game 2. To be honest, this was something I was pretty nervous about. Steve and I had been practicing, but even our best times are usually around 3 hours. And that usually isn't all 5 rounds, mostly because these tables be with his knife by round 3. But even in our last game, we still clocked in at just over 3 hours, and that did go to 4 or 5 rounds. I was definitely worried that I'd be too slow or make loads of mistakes or just generally get worked up and panic because of the timer in the background. The TT guys were very kind enough to put a very ominous red countdown clock on the wall by the tables that watched over you and made sure that you definitely were going to finish on time. I had at least prepared reasonably well. The bases of my army were all magnetized for transport, and the boxes were essentially trays to make it easy to move around and make sure that I could get access to my models. I had all my dice, markers, tape measures, and these kill team markers to hand to make things easier, as well as borrowing some of Steve's awesome extra templates for stuff like deep strikes. I had a few sets of dice in sets of 12 and 40 extra dice in a bag for when the Vanguard veterans got into melee, so I could just dump the bag to make my hit roll. For each game, we did have some time before the official start time to define stuff like deployment zones, and what was really good for this event was that each table had, firstly, amazing and awesome varied terrain that looked beautiful. And secondly, each table had a defined deployment zone. So if you were on table 1, it would always be a specific deployment zone. That meant that the terrain was set around the deployment zone, so it didn't cause any issues if certain terrain caused really awkward deployment zones. However, once we did have time before each round started to sort out the deployment zones, the very minor negative I have that I mentioned was that it was something we had to do despite the deployment being tied to the table. This was already a huge issue, and it was mitigated by the fact that we could do it before the actual game started. But maybe it would have been nice if it were part of the table, especially with some of these more awkward deployment zones that they have in Pariah Nexus. This was actually something that Steve and I mentioned to Spider about after the event, and it isn't actually an easy thing to solve. You might just think putting some tape down before the terrain might work, but that means you have to either pull the tape on and off between each tournament because the tables will change, and it also would ruin the immersion look of the tables. They've got through the effort of setting up these tables with these wonderful pieces of terrain, why would you want to ruin it by just having a bloody great big piece of tape going across it? Maybe templates, but then you'd have to work out how to lay a template around the terrain, which is also very awkward. Realistically, that didn't take away from the day at all. It's less a negative and more a place for improvement. Something else we chatted to Spider about was the round length. 2.5 hours on paper for me does not seem like long, but I actually managed to finish all 3 of my games in time, with 2 going to the full 5 rounds. The only game that I didn't manage to get all 5 rounds in was game 2, and that was because I was tabled way before that. Weirdly, now that I have played there, 2.5 hours felt right. I don't think an extra half an hour would have made me play any better or make any less mistakes, and having an hour and a half of extra time in the day would be way too much, and we'd finish way later than we did. I can't exactly pinpoint what made the games go so smoothly. I think it's probably because there is a definite time limit, and that going over that limit affects others around you. And I'm also there to play the game, and that was my only focus. Whilst I did have some nice chats with my opponents, it isn't the same as playing with friends where we're probably chatting about other stuff, being a bit more relaxed, because we know if we do run out of our time, we can just go over. It doesn't really matter. That 2.5 hour time limit definitely made the day run very smoothly, and overall the event was extremely well organized, with staff coming around asking if you want anything from the bar, taking early lunch orders so that when the food truck arrived they were ready to go. Food was great, by the way, but they serve a lot of chips, so I definitely couldn't finish those. The tables themselves had a really nice shelf underneath to put stuff on. There were laminated cards with all the mission information. The Tabletop Tactics app was updated with the pairings for each round very, very properly. They even had stools if you needed to sit, which somehow I didn't use, and that was definitely a mistake because I am old and my bones don't like standing for that long. But despite the long day, I didn't actually feel that tired until I got back into Steve's car to go home, and it doesn't help that Steve thinks he's cool and has a sports car, which is the most awkward bloody thing to get in and out of with my lanky frame. So after finally clambering in and relaxing a bit, my brain and body definitely got hit by a wave of exhaustion. I'd say the general advice you read for tournaments definitely rings true. Bring plenty of drink, comfortable shoes. I only really own 1 pair and they're comfortable enough. And make sure to eat well, have plenty of food and snacks. But something that didn't really come up, which definitely affected me the next day, was the volume. Remember, there are 30 people in there all trying to play 40k and communicate with their opponents at the same time. So you do have to kind of speak at a fairly significant volume to communicate. There's a lot of, I wound on 3s! Huh? I said I wound on 3s! Okay. Also, I'm re-rolling because of twin linked. What? I also picked up a few really cool ideas about things that make stuff easier to track, or some cool time-saving measures. Some people had tokens that they put down to make sure they knew what they'd already shot, especially with armies with a lot of tanks. My second opponent had this really cool laser that basically puts a line down to help with line of sight, so you'd have to try and feed your tape measure awkwardly past everything, make sure it's straight, and do that without knocking over every model and piece of terrain in a 5-kilometer radius. And one of the best things about the tournament was being able to see everyone's awesome armies on display. There were some incredible armies with some beautiful paintwork and conversions. Someone had this squigified Tyranid army, which was awesome. And there was a hobby award as well for the best army. The winner of the hobby award has this beautiful Night Lord army, loads of cool conversions, and a paint job that is extremely clean and talented. But the more you look at these models, the more you see. It's incredible work, and I'll link to their Instagram in the description below. It's so cool. Everyone was super complimentary about each other's work, and I was really happy to be able to look closely at stuff, take some pictures, but this is where the one big negative that I mentioned earlier comes into play. You see, everyone that looked at the Screaming Ravens, whether that was members of Tabletop Tactics or any other players, all said the exact same thing. Wow, that Tech Marine is so cool. This Tech Marine, and it is very cool. And it's the one model in my army that I didn't do. Every time it was pointed out, I had to caveat that Steve made it for me. And every time it happened, I could feel Steve's smug aura growing larger and larger, as the only model in my army getting any attention was this bloody Tech Marine, which Steve would also gleefully tell people was my army's first actual painted model, which meant his ego grew even larger, and by the end of the day, Steve's smug grin was so wide it was starting to rip his face into. God damn it, Steve. You and your stupid car for being such a good friend. Thanks for the lift and for the incredibly made Tech Marine, dickhead. At least I beat you in the tournament. So in conclusion, I had a fantastic time at my first tournament. I want to thank all of the Tabletop Tactics crew for being really good hosts, all of the players I play against for being really great opponents, everyone I met being really friendly, Steve, and you for watching. I'd love to hear all about your tournament experiences. Let me know in the comments below if you've had good or maybe even bad tournament experiences, or any things that you do to help make the experience easier. Next video, I'll go deeper into the actual games themselves. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. And if you really enjoy this, become a member like these fine folk over here. Look at those names. Like that one. Becoming a member helps support and skill the future of this channel. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this, kind of like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. and I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.